Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining today's What's Up USA session organized by Boardman Grow. So as entrepreneurs and business leaders, we know that international growth is an exciting opportunity and a complex challenge. Today, we will investigate the US market, both the current realities and prospects. So my name is Ulla Kruhse-Lehtonen, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of DAIN Studios. DAIN Studios is a Finnish-German company specializing in data and artificial intelligence. We work with large companies and accelerate their data and AI transformations, both conceptually as well as with practical AI implementations. I'm also a member of the non-executive board of Boardman Grow. And Boardman Grow is a network for entrepreneurs to promote growth and internationalization. We organize many networking events and share best practices. So we're a peer-to-peer network where entrepreneurs can talk openly about their businesses and journeys and get support also for difficult situations. As said, one of our event series is called What's Up? Always in different countries and economic areas. In the past, we have been looking at what's happening in the Nordics, DACH, APAC, and today, the US. The US is an extremely interesting, large market for business purposes for Finnish and European companies. And at the moment, the market faces quite some uncertainty, such as the tariff and tax regulations and immigration regulations. To help us navigate the current complexities and share experiences, we have a very interesting panel of people today present. We have Director Juhani Sirén from Business Finland, who is head of North America, residing in New York. And Juhani will talk about the US geopolitical situation, then followed by Matti, Pennanen, an experienced tax advisor helping Finnish companies to grow internationally, and Riitta, Pelli, CFO of Medix Biochemica, a biotechnology company that has its roots in Finland but has expanded globally to the US and China, for example. So we have 90 minutes for these interesting presentations and discussions, and each speaker has 15 minutes, followed by questions from the audience. The speakers have reviewed the questions you gave at the registration in advance and will incorporate some of the questions in their speeches. But I'd like to encourage you to listen carefully and ask questions after the presentations. You can write them down in the chat or raise your hand during the 10-minute Q&A session. And please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. The cameras I leave at your own discretion. So here you see the agenda, and as said, I would like to welcome Juhani to the stage.
Thank you, Ulla, and good morning from New York City. It's a pleasure being here today with you and talk a bit on my observations on geopolitical matters when it comes to the US. I'll just quickly share my presentation here for you before continuing. So I guess you are able to
yes,
see
we see
now.
you.
Perfect. So I'm Juhani Sirén. I'm the region head and director for Business Finland here in North America. So I oversee all of our growth activities in the US and both Canada. And of course, I think many of you know Business Finland. So we are a funding agency, a trade promotion organization, and also enabler for co-innovation initiatives. And I think the US, first of all, the timing couldn't be better. As Ulla said, you know, it's pretty complex market, and especially with this geopolitical turmoil, it gets tougher because the old rules of conducting business, they might not work anymore. However, this is also a brilliant market shaping opportunity. So I think, you know, Finland has a lot of legs to increase their presence in the US in multiple sectors going forward. But let's go to the presentation now. It's my timer on because I have a bad habit of talking too long. So geopolitical situation in the US. You can see obviously the political cartoon here. You remember this was like the banned cartoon from Washington Post, exemplifying well how the current administration and its president might be trying to lure in the tech billionaires to this cause. And as we have seen, you know, Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, all of those have been pretty active in the beginning of the term, and obviously that has had some impact on a lot of things. But the times are uncertain for sure. You know, this is economic policy uncertainty index. Actually, this has been done from the 60s or 70s, and it measures like the the public sentiment, the media outlet articles, you know, public speeches and such, and you can see this graph looks like absolutely stunning. So you can, when you look at like, you know, roughly 1993, there were like Clinton administration talking about NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreements with Mexico and Canada, and that caused a bit of shuffling in the uncertainty index. Then the second spike you see here actually relates to President Trump's first term here, but this 2025 growth in this index is unprecedented. So it's, you know, more than double, almost triple the value of the previous like track record. So it really exemplifies the kind of the uncertainty that the world is having now because of the administration here. And it's not about only about the, you know, economic nationalism or so-called like isolating policies, but it's also the narrative, because you see now the administration talking in a different way than normally, and that obviously creates uncertainty. But when you really kind of dig down to the geopolitical interests, potential interests of the administration, because no one knows, but we can only make educated guesses, there's three things that the US finds interesting. So first of all, it's securing the supply chains. So obviously, you know, when COVID hit, it showed the weaknesses of US supply chains, and this is a continuation of that. Secondly, obviously, the technological superiority is super important. And then thirdly, you know, fixing the imbalance between trade and, of course, the whole economical situation and deficit of the US. And based on my observation, US has, you know, interests in three different buckets. First bucket is Mexico and Canada. Second one is China, and third one, unfortunately, is the rest of the world. And Mexico and China obviously relates to reshoring and making sure that the supply chains are resilient. So they are extremely important players in this field, especially when you think like aerospace or automotive, and you know that that supply chain is deeply integrated with the system. Second thing relates to China, and this is a bit more complex. Obviously, there's that technological trade war, but it also relates to critical minerals and other type of raw materials, and this is something I will get more into later. And then there's unfortunately the rest of the world. So despite the war in Ukraine, you know, situations in Middle East, US sees those perhaps annoying, but not critical in their own actions, and this is something that we have seen, you know, from the sentiment of the US government regarding Ukraine war or the situation in the Middle East. And when it comes to the tariffs, there's been a lot of discussions and you know ongoing discussions, and especially US and China, they have been just raising the bets constantly, and now it seems that US needs to back off a bit. and they hopefully find some kind of a good long-term solution for the tariffs, which cools off obviously the uncertainty. Because the biggest problem here when thinking of global business, thinking of business in the US is the fact that we are walking in a fog. So if we don't see the actual outcome of these things and get some kind of stability, it's super hard to obviously for companies to invest in any kind of market, and that delays certain type of investments. But when it comes to tariffs to the US from EU, it really depends on the negotiations between EU and US, but for sure, my guess is that 0 tariff negotiations will not go forward, and best guess at the moment is that at least some kind of a 10% baseline will be coming up and will remain when it comes to business from EU, between EU and the US. And I think the UK deal pretty much showed the path, because if UK couldn't negotiate anything down, I think EU is not in a better position. But when you think like the tech and the critical mineral parts, there's a couple of slides I want to show you to really kind of make you understand the global supply chain of different kind of things. So here you can see two things. First of all, the technology, you know, Japan silicon wafer market, 56% of those. South Korea is big in memory chip fabrication. Taiwan, obviously, you know, TSMC, you know, the world's largest manufacturer of semiconductors, lithography machines to create integrated circuits. ASML in Netherlands is the biggest premium producer of those huge machines. And then there's, of course, in the US, there's the, you know, electronic design, all the things that make the chip production and manufacturing workable. And then you have China, you have Chile, and then you have Australia, who are having a lot of like rare earth and critical mineral reserves. So when you think it from the US point of view, of course, they want to make sure that they are on the right side when it comes to technology and technology providers and the critical minerals to go forward. But the critical minerals actually, they create a problem. So they are more concentrated at the moment geographically than natural gas or oil production. And there's two things to keep in mind. First of all, the extraction of a mineral or a commodity, and that's something you cannot control. You know, either you have like, you know, lithium or copper within the borders of your country, or you don't. However, when it comes to processing those minerals or commodities, that's where you can create an impact. And as you can see from the right part of the graph, you can see that China is extremely involved in a lot of processing. And when you think like, I'll give an example. Of course, rare earths is a super easy to understand that if China controls the processing, roughly like, you know, close to 90% of the rare earth processing, they also can control the price. They can control who gets it first, and they are able to build their domestic production and green transition, digital transition, you know, all these things that need rare earth minerals. They can actually build the domestic presence first and then start selling it forward. But I will raise here copper. You know, China controls 40% of the copper processing, and actually 20%. In addition to that, 20% indirectly, which means that, you know, you think of copper, iPhone has like, I don't know, 15 grams of copper, but without that 15 grams, iPhone doesn't work. Or when you are creating green energy solutions like solar power, roughly 1 megawatt of solar power needs 4 tons of copper. And at the moment, the copper production, the demand and supply, they are roughly in balance. But the forecasts assume, based on the growth of data centers, use of AI, energy grids, etc., that actually the demand for copper will almost double in next 25 years, and that creates a problem because you cannot actually mine that much more copper with the existing or upcoming projects. So there will be a shortage when it comes to supply of copper, and you can just think what happens when China controls the processing, and let's see if Tesla or Apple will get copper in next 10-15 years unless there is a change. And that change kind of relates also to this reshoring of things. So first of all, Latin America is super important when it comes to the critical minerals, to coppers and such, and the US is obviously developing, as other countries, developing better presence in Latin America, which is historically been the backyard of China, and trying to make changes there for the critical minerals. But the other thing is that when you have those critical minerals, you have to also build that technological supremacy. And now, speaking of tariffs and US trying to attract foreign investments in their own land. In media, I would read media outlets a bit carefully and critically, because they are mostly complaining that why does the US want to become or go back to the 70s with those old factory jobs and such. But when you look at the statistics of foreign direct investments or other pledges from the US companies to invest into the US, actually most of those are really advanced high-tech initiatives, which are critical and priority for the US technological development. And I think these tariffs have worked in a sense that foreign investors have now announced over 500 greenfield projects in the US during early months of 2025, and that's almost a third of an increase for the last year. And of course, the investment pledges have reached already like $6 trillion in mid-May 2025. You have to take this with a bit of a grain of salt, because like Goldman Sachs estimates that maybe it's like 130 billion, which actually comes to reality during this year. But nevertheless, they are building this new kind of foreign direct investment base to increase the capabilities of the US going forward. And there's a couple of examples of the pledges, and when we are and the value of those. So when we are of course happy in Finland to get 1 billion data center, but the volume and the kind of the grand or the magnitude of these investments are extremely big in the US. And then of course you build that ecosystem around it. So they need housing, they need restaurants, they need all the services. So that's something to keep in mind. But what about Finland? How does this relate to us and what we can do? I have 5 points here to understand where we are coming from maybe, and what's our advantage here. And of course, NATO is a super important part, especially from a perspective that we are a provider of the security and not the consumer. So we are a trustworthy ally for the US government. Then of course, the current administration here values transactional relationships, like bilateral relationships. So Finland is well liked, but we also have to keep in mind that we are part of the EU, and of course our negotiation power isn't as big alone as a member of the EU. But when it comes to direct business, I think a good way to think this through is that Finland is not the direct competitor for the US businesses, but an enabler in technology for the US, meaning that we are able to smartly figure out what's our part of the value chain and make the US counterpart shine by creating solutions for them. Then, of course, when the federal administration is what it is, I think the importance of state-level collaboration needs to be addressed. U.S. market isn't U.S. market. There's 50 states. There's large cities, different pockets of opportunities, which Finnish companies should explore. And then, of course, the rules of business changing with the national security mindset. It's not only the price at the moment which matters. It's actually how is the technology solving the problem, and how does that affect on the national security of the US. So that's also kind of a market shaping opportunity which I see interesting. But I think when all the others are scared, I think Finns need to be brave. And this is a quote from Winston Churchill: a pessimist sees the difficulty in every opportunity, and an optimist sees the opportunity in every difficulty. So I think that the times will be good for Finland if we are proactive, if we're smart, and still remain pragmatic as always. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Juhani. That was an insightful presentation. Any questions from the audience? You have time, so I will ask you a couple of questions. Does it mean that when you showed this slide about the foreign direct investments into the US, so would you say that the tariff policies work to some extent?
To some extent, I guess they do. And the kind of the interesting thing here is that it's not only foreign direct investments, but it seems that the administration and the government here is also forcing local companies to bring the supply chains and investments back to the US. So there was like NVIDIA is a good example, or such. So they are trying to make sure or building that supply chain resilience from both directions. Of course, they want to have the domestic production, and in some cases tariffs work. However, I see that this has been a push for the companies who have been thinking of the investment nevertheless, or despite the tariffs. And of course, there's the carrot part as well. So if it's over $1 billion investment, the current administration makes it easier to apply for different kind of permits or a fast track for different tax incentives and tax breaks.
Okay, got it. Now we have some questions online. A couple of questions. What states do you see as having the most opportunity for Finland? You mentioned that state level collaboration.
Yeah, it depends a bit on the sector. Obviously, when it comes to officially, you don't talk a lot about twin transition or green transition here anymore, because the current narrative is a bit different. But it's still it's workable for Finnish like clean tech technologies, because then we can talk about energy efficiency or similar kind of things. So there's green in green, there's money in green transition. So how to the narrative should be more that how do you save money or get more profit, and I think that's the kind of way to move forward. So when it comes to like twin transition, obviously California is still doing extremely well. They are building the LA Olympics, get the Olympic Games for 2028, and they have huge plans for electrification, mobility, all these kind of things, and built environment, which is interesting from a Finnish perspective. Then you have like Minnesota when it comes to health tech is pretty interesting there with Mayo Clinic, and of course the forestry and bioeconomy. Texas, where we are opening up our new consulate general actually in the autumn. Texas in many ways is super interesting when it comes to energy, health, and also defense. And I think this defense and dual use as a topic, it pops up in every discussion I have with officials of a certain state, they are interested in defense and dual use technologies as well. And then we have to keep in mind, the ports are interesting from a Finnish perspective. We have a lot of like port and cybersecurity, which could relate also to the port. So that's also one interesting segment to explore. But it really depends on the sector you're in.
Okay, I understand. There's also a question about New York, since that's where you reside. So what kind of cases and companies do you have there, and who should contact you? I guess as such, you're looking after the whole country, so not only New York.
Yeah,
but,
we're doing excellent collaboration with the Consulate General here in New York. So they are more focused on local aspects. Here again, it's digital and green technologies are pretty interesting from the New York perspective. But of course, then you can broaden it up, to Connecticut or down south to North Carolina or Georgia. But this is kind of the good place, and of course the money. Part of the investors are here. So New York is a pretty good location to start with in most cases. But then you have to have the feet on the ground where your customers or other activities are.
Yes. Hey, one question I was wondering, a bit unrelated to your presentation, but since you are now there on the ground, so to say, in the US, so what is the sentiment? We read in the media. I read the New York Times every day and so forth. So you kind of get a view of what's happening. But what do regular people think? Like your friends, your colleagues, neighbors, so about the current administration?
Well, it really depends on with who you talk. So I think like in New York, historically, you want to hide if you're a Republican, and that because it's in most cases it's a democratic city and a state. But I think people are more open to talk about politics in private. They are not utterly unhappy with the situation. I think the shock in the beginning was pretty drastic. But now it's like, back to day-to-day life and nothing has exploded or vanished away. Maybe people are mostly like concerned about the reduction of science and research. As an example, like National Science Foundation, which is doing foundational like research, and now they have roughly like $9 billion annual budget. And now it might be decreased down to 4 billion in coming years. So that creates a huge gap in the foundational studies. And then what happens? Do we have any like deep tech companies here going forward? Because normally, like the US deep tech companies have originated from these kind of research initiatives. So maybe the kind of the education part is something which is which pops up pretty well, but no like avocado gate or concerns about grocery prices or all these kind of things. So it's pretty normal.
Interesting. Yeah.
And I have to say the New York Times is pretty democratic,
of course,
news outlet, so it gives that other side of the story.
Yeah. All right. Hey, thank you, Juhani. Very much appreciated.
Thanks for having me.
Yes. So I guess
I have a question. Sorry, I'm connecting from a phone, so I wasn't able to
okay,
request.
Go ahead.
So my name is Ilkka Saaren, and I'm Director for Trade Policy at the Foreign Ministry. And just a few comments to what Juhani said, and also a request to companies for information. We see that there are 4 scenarios how this could end up the tariff war. First one of them would be trade war, but taking into account what happened when the US was trying to set the extremely high so-called reciprocal tariffs, the markets reacted very negatively. We consider that to be an unlikely development at this stage. Second one would be a deal scenario, which seems to be most likely, taking into account particularly how the negotiations are going with UK and China and others. And it's something which seems to be in the DNA of the current president as well, to strike deals and then present them as victories. Third one would be a frozen conflict scenario, so to speak. So which would mean that some sort of duties will stay, and there is like this balance of terror between the different parties, so that the US will have certain duties in place and maybe trading partners will do so as well. And the fourth scenario would be a reset scenario, so where all the international trading system would be reset with something totally different, which would relate to tariffs, which would relate then to non-tariff barriers and also to currency valuation issues and so forth. Now, as said, we consider the deal scenario most likely, and I think this was something that Juhani was saying as well. However, I would slightly disagree with Juhani when it comes to the using the UK agreement as a precedent for the EU. I think the EU is clearly in a stronger position to negotiate a better deal, and it needs to be taken into account as well that the UK agreement covers maybe 20% so far of the entire agreement, so 80% has not been agreed. So what the UK did was that they tried to salvage and managed to do so two critical sectors, so car sector and then steel manufacturing. So two sectors where they are extremely dependent on the US market, and also where they have had major difficulties, particularly in steel, when it comes to their capacity. Now, on the second point, so request to companies. Now that the negotiations are taking place between EU and the US, for example, the EU has been preparing a countermeasure list, so list of tariff hikes on US goods should the US not agree to negotiate and should there not be a solution. We have sent via our web pages and via trade federations and so forth a request for information based on the list that the European Commission has published. And what we are looking at and what we are hoping, the kind of input we are hoping from companies, is them to have a look at the list and tell us if there are products on that countermeasure list which are vital for their production, for example, and where the US is the only real or the major source of inputs. For example, industrial sector inputs. Are there such products where the US is main producer and main source of production input, and we should then try to get away from the EU countermeasure list. So you should find this if you haven't received it. Otherwise, you should find this on the Foreign Ministry web pages, or you can contact me directly. So my name is Ilkka Saarinen, and I'd be happy to hear about your interest and what we can then present to the European Commission, and hopefully then be able to get rid of those tariff lines on the countermeasure list. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Hey, thank you, Ilkka. If you are now, you said you're on the phone, but if there is a chance, maybe at some point, maybe you can put the link in the chat here, so it's everybody. People don't need to search for the document.
Sure, or I can send that separately, maybe to the organizers.
Yeah, you can send it to DAIN.
That would be really useful. So we are expecting comments by 2nd of June, and the commission deadline is 10th of June. So we would then have time to maybe have dialogue. So we are having constant dialogue with many companies at the moment. So in order to create kind of like good justifications for our request.
Okay, perfect. Hey, thank you, Ilkka, for chipping in. And
can I ask a question from Ilkka, since Ilkka is on the line?
Okay, go ahead.
Regarding digital taxes, there's been some questions or discussions going around whether the EU could implement digital taxes as a retaliatory measure towards the US. So what's your view on that? Is that on the table?
That's not yet on the table. That would require the activation of a so-called anti-coercion instrument, so which is an EU instrument originally created with a view of it possibly being used against China. You may recall that there was a trade spat between, or let's say a ban of importing Lithuanian goods to China at one point because there was a Taiwanese embassy that was opened in Vilnius. So the EU figured that there should be an instrument that can then be used against this kind of coercion. It has not yet been activated. We hope that it never needs to be activated, but we've remained open to the option of also using services-based instruments, and then that would require the activation of the anti-coercion instrument. But let's hope that there will be a solution prior to going to that. But that would be one of the more extreme countermeasures that the EU could take, and we hope that we wouldn't need to go that far.
Yes. Okay. Hey, thank you. Very, very informative. And Matti, you're already there. So you're next. So Matti, maybe introduce yourself. It's a partner from PwC, and it's a good continuation now. Also, what Juhani and Ilkka both said about the tariffs and taxes and so forth. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. As said, Matti Pennanen is my name, and I'm helping Finnish growth companies to strengthen their position in new markets and go to new markets. I have been helping with a lot of companies entering the US market, and mostly with taxes and operating models and stuff like that. So that's a bit of a background. And there's...
Quick question: are you able to make it whole widescreen?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Is it better now?
Yep.
Yes, good. So there are actually two items that I wanted to share. I'm looking at the timeline as well. Maybe we will go quickly.
You have your 15 minutes. We had a little bit extra at the end, so don't worry.
So one of the other item is the tariffs, of course. That's something that I think nobody has been able to avoid, and it's been on the news quite a lot. And the other one is the one big beautiful bill that just came out last week from the Ways and Means Committee in the US. That's something that has not hit the headlines, at least in Finland. So those are kind of the two topics, and maybe a small caveat, I'm not a customs expert, but I'll try to give an overview of the tariff situation. And I think it's not something that is new. At least we expected that there will be some tariffs when Trump made president. I think something that was really surprising, and it seems that the market viewed it as well, that it seemed for a while that it's not just a negotiation tool for Trump. So he's actually committed to going forward with the tariffs. But just to set the scene and some of the basics, so there's three critical components regarding the tariffs and what's the amount of tariffs payable. That's the customs code. That's a 10-digit code. So how you classify your goods entering into the US. Then there's the origin of the goods. So if you are importing from China goods to the EU and then exporting them to the US, they would still be China origin goods. And then there's the value. So those are the kind of the three main components of what's the value and what's the amount of tariffs payable. And then there's different types of tariffs, of course. There's the kind of a baseline tariff that is now applicable on all imports in the US. Then there's country-specific tariff. That's something that we see, the reciprocal tariffs that has now been suspended for 90 days. That's going to end early June. I think it was 7th June or 8th June, July for EU and early August for China. And then there's the industry-specific tariffs. There's a 25% tariffs on steel and aluminum. There's even a breakdown that you would need to that is required by the US, that if you import goods that contains steel and aluminum, then you would need to give a percentage of how much steel and aluminum is in those goods. And there's quotas as well. So there might be some quotas that a smaller tariffs apply, like we see in the UK and US trade deal. That I think it was 100,000 first cars are with a certain tariff, and in excess of that 100,000 there would be a higher tariff. And then there's exceptions. There's the kind of a $800 de minimis exception in the US, not applicable to China and Hong Kong. Certain goods are accepted as well or exempted as well. Pharmaceuticals are one. There's ongoing investigation published by Trump or commented by Trump that he's investigating to impose tariffs on pharmaceuticals as well. And considering the 90-day pause that we currently have, and taking a look at what happened in the Liberation Day, as we saw, when you go into the weeds, there is a certain date for in-transit goods that was exempted as well from the tariffs. So currently there is no certainty that such an in-transit exemption would apply to the goods now in transit to the US within the 90-day pause, but I suspect that it would be the case. And as you've been seeing and hearing, there's a lot of uncertainty whether Trump wakes up in the morning and decides to impose tariffs or end the suspension of the tariff, reciprocal tariffs. It's always a possibility. Of course, there's no negotiation between US and EU and China and different countries. So probably will not have such a decision unless it seems that the negotiations are not going forward. So let's see what happens. So what you can do, there are some things that you could consider in the short term, medium term, and the long term. So in the short term, I think there are some no regret options that you could take, and maybe there's something that we can continue with Riitta as well. There's the first sale for exports rule. There's a duty drawback possibility, might be a burdensome process. There's a free trade zone for certain types of US warehousing and distribution activities regionally might be available, and for what we can see, a lot of customers or a lot of companies are not really confident even on the classification of their products. So whether you could classify your products into something different category going forward, that's a possibility. And of course, looking at the origin of the goods, if that's declared correctly or not. Of course, there could be some, if possible, of course, depending on the company's situation and the negotiation powers, there might be possibility to, of course, raise prices. That's a more or less of a commercial decision and discussion, and even might be a contracting issue as well with the clients. There might be some other possibilities in the short term or mid-term to unbundle something. So maybe unbundling goods with intangibles and making a different types of arrangements in selling the goods and importing the goods in the US and possibly invoicing from something else, not related entirely to the goods imported. And in the medium term, there's something that could be considered as well. I would say within kind of a year or two. And internally, that's something that companies could take a look at. What's their operating and sales model? Is it a cost plus or an agent model? Is there a possibility to make changes to a kind of a local distribution models? And there are some possibilities, but there's of course implications that needs to be taken into account. Maybe there's an exit tax in Europe or in another country. So something to consider. And that holds also for the long term, kind of whether you onshore to the US, what's your production and what's your transfer pricing model going forward. That needs to be planned carefully. So there are, maybe I'll just let you quickly take a look. So there's some possibilities for the short term kind of solutions for the tariffs. So classification analysis and taking a look at whether your classification is correct or not, whether your origin of the goods is correct, and then the duty drawback, first sale rule, and whether there's a possibility for tariff exclusion or exemption as well. So there's a tons of details. I won't go into the details, but if I took and I looked the announcement briefing from Trump, and it seemed that it's going to be broad-based, but it's not always clear, and that's the difficulty. It's not always clear what are the actual exemptions, what are the actual dates and timelines. That's not entirely clear at the time of when the Trump announces something. So that's something to be really, really critical and take a look at in close detail. Now this one big beautiful bill, or maybe I should stop if there's something that is concerning tariff that there's a question online. If not, then maybe we could go forward to the one big beautiful bill, and there's I think it was 369 pages or something legislation proposed. So there's a lot of details in that proposal. There's one that is worth noting to a Finnish company, or a Finnish company with the US subsidiaries as well, and there's the proposed new section called 899, and that would, if it would pass, so now I think it's in the House of Representatives this week, and then if it's passed, then it will go to the Senate. But if it's passed in its current form, it would mean that from 1st of January next year, there would be a treaty override, in the sense that dividends, interests, royalties that currently mostly have zero withholding taxes between Finland and the US, according to the treaty, would in the first year be applicable for 5% withholding tax, and that would increase yearly, capping at 20%. And it seems that it's with the domestic rate going forward, it might reach 50% withholding tax, and that's something that is not according to the treaty. So it would be a cost for the Finnish company. It would not be credited in Finland. Just making a note. And with the US, there's been some discussion around, and typically there's no kind of clear distinction, or there has not been that much emphasis on what constitutes a royalty, because always it's been a 0%, but in the future there might be some discussion around that as well. In addition, there's a new section that would apply to the US companies of Finnish subsidiaries, and that's the modified BEAT rules. And in essence, it would at least require for the BEAT calculations in the US, that's the base erosion and anti-avoidance tax in the US. So there would be a 12.5% of so-called minimum tax, but that's recalculated by adding royalties, management fees, and the likes. As said, it's not yet final, and we expect that it will go to the Senate, and it might even become final in June already, but expected to be final in October at the latest. So there's quite a lot of tax legislation that are sunsetting in the US, and that's why they need to have this bill passed in October. Good. So how to prepare in times of uncertainty? So typically what happens is that you are not doing anything. So that's not a good answer. What you could do and should do, of course, is to utilize any possibility, and that's related to the classification, whether there's a possibility for first trail rule or something else. The so-called non-regret actions that you could take, that's recommended, of course. And scenario planning, Ilkka was there was a good comment from Ilkka that there are different kinds of scenarios. I think it might even be that we will see across the board 10% being the kind of a baseline tariff. If the EU gets a better deal than the UK, that's good. But it seems that some amount of tariffs will stay. And what we've seen over the kind of 3 or 4 years already, that supply chains have changed a bit. So there is some sort of a decentralization of production, and companies looking quite critically their supply chains overall. Good. I think my 15 minutes is up. Ulla, is there some questions?
I don't see questions online, but maybe people are still thinking about it. So thank you, Matti. This is very extensive and not a simple area, definitely. So we need experts like yourself. How would you overall see, because a bit the underlying tone is now that there's so much uncertainty also related to the president's even moods or things like that that are you thinking that the companies should really make contingency plans how to avoid working with the being reliant on the US? This is a very direct question, but this was a bit the undertone in your presentation.
Of course, it's something that the companies need to assess. US is still a big market, so for a lot of Finnish companies, the US market is still attractive. Let's see how the economy goes with the tariffs and the negotiations and inflation going forward. But it's nevertheless, it's still a big market. In addition, there might be some companies that are pretty dependent on some supplies from the US as well.
In your long-term scenario regarding the tariffs, what is long-term for you?
Like 5 to 10 years.
Okay, so because beyond
if you think about establishing a factory, and maybe Riitta, you can comment as well, it might take at least 2 to 3 years, even in the US, or even longer.
Yes.
And then there's kind of do you have ability to attract talent that you need locally or not? And what's the cost of employees in the US? So a lot of planning goes into it.
Stephen is asking, there are a couple of questions. Well, I started with Stephen. Opportunity for Finland that the dollar is dropping its value. Is that the long-term trend? I mean, I guess you don't mean our exports, but rather the capital markets. Matti, any comment from you?
Well, I don't see clearly how the dollar would not be a kind of a reserve currency going forward in the world. That's the kind of
okay, so there is no credible alternative.
Yeah, at least for now,
yeah.
For as long as I can see.
All right. Annuka is asking, what, if anything, do the tariffs mean to SaaS companies delivering electronic goods to US customers?
Good question. Software as a service is not goods imported, although Trump already considered posing tariffs on movies even produced outside US. So
yes.
But it's a good question,
Yeah, that's right. All right, so maybe thank you, Matti, now for your presentation, and we will actually continue now. You will continue in the role of an interviewer, and we will loop in Riitta from Medix Biochemica. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce the name of your company. Maybe you can correct us. And maybe you also are going to tell a bit like what Medix does. Go ahead.
All right, thank you, Ulla. Yeah, go ahead, Matti.
Yeah, and DAIN, I think you have some material regarding Medix, if we can see that as well.
Yeah.
But Riitta, maybe you could give a short overview. What's Medix and how has your US journey begun, and how is it going so far?
Absolutely. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present Medix Biochemica today, and also hopefully I can answer some of the questions that you may have about presence in the US market and entering the US market. So my name is Riitta Pelli. I'm CFO for Medix Biochemica. I'm based in Espoo, Finland, but I'm saying good morning to everybody today from St. Louis, Missouri. So we've been experiencing some pretty heavy winds, but thankfully we are all very good here this morning. And Medix Biochemica is a global leader in high quality biological raw materials for in vitro diagnostics industry. So if you think about that, so what it means is that, for example, when you have your blood drawn and you have tests taken, so we do provide those raw materials that assay reagents that tell you whether you have high CRP or whether you have influenza or potentially COVID. And we also provide raw materials for the quality controls to test whether those tests are working as they have been designed to work. We have a global footprint, so very interesting currently regarding to the tariffs discussion. So we have production and headquarters in Espoo, Finland. We have 3 other European sites. We have presence in China, both manufacturing and a sales office in Shanghai. And then in US, we are currently located in 3 states. So our US headquarters is here in Missouri, in St. Louis, where I'm today. Then we have a site in Weston, Florida. And then we also have a site in Westbrook, Maine at the currently. And as I said, so Medix Biochemica is turning 40 this year. But really, if we think about the journey of Medix Biochemica, so Devco Partners invested in Medix Biochemica some 7 years ago, and since then the growth has been really accelerated. We've grown from 2017 to 2024 from 20 million to 72 million. That's been fueled with acquisitions. So we've done 8 acquisitions, but also quite a strong organic growth. And if we talk about US specific, so from 2017, roughly 5 million in sales, and today we are looking at 30 million business in US. And we were also very pleased to conclude a capital raise last year. So over 600 million of investment commitments to Devco funds to support the Medix Biochemica future growth. And we are also very pleased that the raise was led by a US Chicago-based CRC, so Council Ring Capital. We have currently production in terms of our US presence. So 3 production sites. We have a sales force in US, and we established our first US company in 2018 with 1 and 2 employees. We started with sales teams. First, we kind of followed our customers to US, and we've grown the business through acquisitions and organically ever since. So that's shortly about Medix Biochemica and our presence currently in US market.
Good. How would you first a warm-up question? How would you describe the different states you operate in different states in the US?
Oh, that's an interesting question. We have Florida, and we have Missouri, and we have Maine. Maine is probably a state that it's in the northeast of US, a very beautiful, nice state, but probably from the business perspective, it's not the first state that comes to people's minds. And then when we come to Missouri, so I think that it's a little bit forgotten state in the sense that people probably don't realize that it's economically quite vibrant, especially here in the St. Louis area. Missouri was actually the state that created most new jobs last year. It grew above the average rates in US. So for us, it has been a very good place to be. It's centrally located. We serve US and North America from our headquarters in St. Louis. And then Florida, of course, that's then a very different state. We do have a production facility there, but I would say that in terms of like recruitment and things like that, Florida is certainly very different compared to Missouri, and finding talent and in Florida, for example, is sometimes a bit challenging.
Yeah, Okay. Good. And I want to ask about tariffs as well.
Oh yeah,
So were you surprised that the tariff or the tariff announcement or the amount?
The first, I was well. Trump had in his first kind of a presidential period, so he had already. This is not a completely new thinking from his regime, but of course the magnitude and the pace of the tariffs and was a big surprise, and it also at Medix Biochemica. So we needed quite quickly to sort of organize around the tariff issue, look through our supply chains, how we serve our customers, what products goes to what customers. For example, we had meetings on weekly cadence. I think one board meeting, so I think I updated the tariff slides within 1 week, like something like 5 times with the different scenarios, because the information was gradually it was changing and it was becoming gradually more clear. So certainly uncertain times, but something to keep in mind is that you as a business, even though it impacts you, you are not the only one business. There are other businesses in your industry. And when we talk about, for example, the lucrativeness of US market, so I still, even though you need to pay attention to taxes and tariffs and what's happening there and be smart about that, but it's still business first. And US is an extremely interesting market, at least in our industry. So keep, be smart about the tariffs and the taxes, but business first.
Yeah, for sure. Did you made any kind of formal structures like?
We had a cadence of
or something like that.
Yeah, we had a cadence of weekly meetings, operations, finance, and the commercial teams, and then plenty of more informal forums, and then also we had discussions with our advisors regarding the many of the topics that you mentioned there, looking at the tariff codes, maybe also investigating into duty drawbacks in US in some cases. We still we have production in all three, so Europe, US, and China. So I think we're very well placed in that sense to serve the markets, but we are not obviously producing every single product at all of three sites. So there are products that move globally. So we're still looking into the possibilities of serving customers even more locally with locally produced products. So that is definitely a scenario that we will need to look into as one of the options that how we serve the different markets.
Have you received comments or questions from clients that are you onshoring or what's your supply chain?
That was something that surprised us a little bit, not too much. I was actually in a call with a Canadian customer kind of couple of weeks after the tariffs discussions started or the announcements were made, and kind of reassuring that we can service them from Finland. But at the moment, it didn't seem to be like that urgent topic. Maybe it was still sinking in a little bit, and also something that people were waiting for, that what would be the sort of the final decision, and maybe the first ones were seen a bit as a temporary phase to get to a deal with the different governments and the different areas in the world. So that was probably reassured some of the customers.
Yeah.
But there are, of course, some customers who are asking, but not a large number of customers coming to us about this.
Yeah. Okay. I want to have you have a background in medical companies, others as well, Blueprint Genetics as your former employer as well. I just wanted to have a quick discussion around M&A as an expansion strategy to the US.
Yeah.
How different is it in terms of doing M&A in let's say Europe or in Asia or in the US?
Yeah, first I probably need to say that I have limited experience and limited to financial due diligence in Asia, so that I cannot comment. But I would say that the fundamentals are still the same, whether you're doing M&A in US or in Europe. But maybe in terms of like US, so you will definitely need to be careful when selecting your partners, you know, the local knowledge, understanding the US, even state level regulation. So we talk about US as US, but for example, when you look into the companies, it's actually quite important to understand the state and the state level regulation. So I would say that, for example, that's important. I think that in US, in many cases, for example, from my role from CFO seat, so companies don't have audited financial statements. So the importance of really understanding the financials and how they've been pulled together is quite important. And of course, in terms of the, for example, employment law and things like this. So in US, the system is different, so you need to understand the risks associated if there are. So those could lead to a larger liabilities potential than in same size companies, for example, in Finland. But fundamentally, doing M&A in US or in Europe, I wouldn't see a fundamental difference in that.
How about complexity? Let's say it's more complex, right? But let's take a view of a, let's say, a Finnish only operating company or Europe wide compared to the US market. It's not a single market.
Yeah, and Europe is not a single market either. So I think that's good to keep in mind. So I think it's you know, doing your due diligence, understanding what you are investing in and where within which market it operates and things like this. I wouldn't, you know, those fundamentals stay still. But of course, currently in US, there's a lot of uncertainty around the taxes, and as you were mentioning, for example, the funding structures, if you drew it as a, you know, intercompany loans and things like that, looking forward. So I think that you will need to sort of do a bit of more modeling regarding the different scenarios on cash flows and things like that.
But overall, going forward, what's your view or Medix view in terms of US market and its attractiveness?
Yeah, we see it as a highly attractive company. I think one of the big players in our fields was also mentioned here in the first presentation, Roche investing into US. So for us in our industry, US definitely continues to be an interesting and attractive market that we will continue to invest in. I think we will need to look into sort of that, how much production we have. Do we need to have some more localized production to serve the customers better with local products? That is a one scenario, but ultimately, you know, the market is very attractive for us at the moment, and we see that to continue in the future as well.
Regardless of the tariffs?
Regardless of the tariffs, we operate in an industry where the raw materials basically go to FDA approved products. So changing a raw material provider comes with a cost. So like the very sudden moves are not expected. Of course, we need to stay competitive. You know, look at our production efficiency and look at our cross margins, make sure that we stay competitive and can offer the best quality products at competitive prices also in US. But despite the tariffs, so I strongly believe that US will be a growth market where we invest in the future as well.
Matti, do you think that we can start jumping in also with with questions?
Please.
I actually have, Riitta, a question to you, since you mentioned that, and this is also opening now for all the listeners or participants. So, but you said that the company is already 40 years old, and but then you had a big, change or jump in after 2017. But how would you now, apart from the tariffs, but in general, if you think of the U.S. market and you emphasize how attractive it is, if we have now people here, entrepreneurs who are thinking about entering the U.S. market, so how would you start? Like you mentioned that you started with salespeople and then the customers followed. But if you don't have anything in the U.S. and you would like to go there, and I know it depends on the industry and so forth, but any like learnings or any advice?
Yeah, generally, of course, I think it's a very valid strategy to follow your customers and find that first customer. But I would perhaps start building the networks. There are Finnish companies, there are organizations in US following up the market, perhaps entering the physical or the digital trade shows in your industry, and getting more information and really getting those relationships in place in US. And with potential customers, suppliers, the industry players. So that would be my advice to any company that's and I think that, for example, Finnish companies typically are quite, open to talk about their experiences. So be brave, contact people that and maybe ask for someone who has experience and provide, create your networks and hear it from the people who have been experiencing the same issues previously.
Is it beneficial to have like local people, Americans on the ground? Yeah.
Yeah, I think, one of it's a fast-paced market. So for example, serving, I've said a couple of times, like serving locally. So kind of sales teams, customer service, it's a fast-paced market. So sometimes I feel that it's maybe not fully understood in Finland that US customers don't want to wait overnight for for their emails to be answered and so forth. So it's I think that it's very important to be local here, have local teams present in the country and creating those relationships and building business. It's very difficult to do overseas, especially in B2B market.
Yes. Yeah. And if you don't have any contacts, you recommend are the other Finnish companies, trade shows?
Trade shows, maybe partnering up with some of the advisors, helping to find your footprint in US. All the states basically have some sort of organizations that are typically quite happy to talk about the state and helping you to set up in those states.
Are there any, Stephen is asking, are there some like typical mistakes that Finns make when entering the market?
Yeah, that's of course, I'm probably speaking from the finance perspective, but I would again sort of like when you're entering the market and so pick your advisors, financial, tax, legal, and to make sure that you know enough of the market, you work with those advisors. Be not the US is, from the advisor perspective, significantly more expensive than in Finland. That needs to be taken into account. But it's also those partners are the ones that also safeguard your business. So I think again, talk to networks, people who have worked with these advisors. Make sure that you have the right support in those areas when you enter the market. One thing that I could say from my own experience is that also banking partners, can openly say that we had a bank account in Silicon Valley Bank when it hit some of the troubles. So now we definitely understand to have 2 banking partners in US.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. How long would you say, like, continuing on this building a relationship phase typically lasts, and maybe also related to the offering? So I have heard this notion that if you go to US, your offering should be really sharp, so you should be differentiated. Would you agree to that?
I think, yeah, it's a competitive market, of course. If you're selling a commodity, how to be seen, how to be heard, how to differentiate. Yeah, I think, yeah, I would agree on that. And of course, I would also emphasize the service levels and the service networks, and even no matter how good your product is, if you don't have that, fast-paced local service, maybe it's a distributor in the beginning or something like that, it will be difficult to create a footprint here in US.
Exactly. Any questions from the line? Yeah, Christina is commenting on the offering. Exactly, I guess it's everywhere, but probably if you're coming on as a foreigner to a new market, you need to be especially clear what who you are, what you're offering. Yeah. Yes. Yeah, looking at anybody. Matti, did you have any questions before I entered?
Not really. Looking forward, I think there's going to be quite interesting few months going forward with all the trade negotiations and back and forth, and it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
Yes, absolutely interesting, and a bit scary as well. But definitely interesting.
And I think the worst scenario would be the one that everyone starts waiting for the new government in the US and not doing anything. It will be a wasted opportunity as well.
Yes. All right. So maybe then thank you, Matti and Riitta. Much appreciated. It was really nice to hear from Riitta also, like how it is to do business there, and especially now we are even located in Missouri as we speak. To quickly wrap up, yeah, we had Juhani telling about the big picture about the tariffs, and especially I found interesting the mineral side of things, like the tech and supply chain, the extraction and processing of those critical minerals, and those charts that you showed, and how dependent the whole world is of certain countries. And then over all your sentiment, Juhani, about that still things continue despite sometimes maybe here it looks like it's all doom and gloom, but in reality people are pretty good at shuffling things around, also, even if it's not always optimal. And you also mentioned, as also Riitta, now you as well, the state level collaboration. I guess Matti, you said, actually you all said it, that how important it is that we shouldn't just look at the US as one place. Then yeah, Matti, you spoke a lot about the tariffs, which and the new bills, the big beautiful bill. That was also not that clear to me, the new section 899. Now we will all follow how it's proceeding in the House of Representatives and in the Senates, and how we should react to it, and this whole scenario thinking also what you, Ilkka, were pitching in between was really useful. I guess in general, scenario thinking is always good to be, even if it's a pessimistic scenario, but at least you then know what's the worst case situation. So to be honest to yourself. And then, yeah, now Riitta, really great to hear from your personal or your company's journey, and really good luck with that. So yeah, you have its amazing growth that you guys have made within a few years, and in an area that has so much potential. So that's really impressive. Certainly not easy, but really great to hear about Finnish companies like yourselves. Now, at least all we on this call know about you and your offerings. Yeah, I think at this point we will end this call. So thank you, all participants. And of course, feel free to join the great organization if you're an entrepreneur and you would like to have some peer-to-peer sparring in different topics related to your business and your life.